lecturer, research fellow. Today we are welcoming participants and advising that this session is part of the week's activities hosted by the Labor Studies Department and Elmer Francois Institute of Research and Debate of the college. We are looking at the commemoration of May Day, which seemed to have lost its recognition through the years, having been replaced by our observation of Labor Day. Today we want to speak to us, especially working people, about the significance of Labor Day. It's important for us to get to understand, know a little bit more about our history and working people's struggle that is embedded in Labor Day that's internationally recognized. So while we in Trinidad and Tobago recognize Labor Day, the world over recognizes the struggle of working people through its observation of May Day. So today we will take pleasure in learning a bit more of our history so that those who can pass it on to us can empower us to pass it on to those who are coming behind. So we welcome today our three panelists that will talk to us about the significance of May Day and, more importantly, what's in it for us in terms of recognizing the struggles of working people. We are going to ask you all to take us back and then bring some relevance to where we are today, so at least we can assess how far we've come and how far we need to go again. So without further ado, I want to read the bio of our panelists so that we know we are in the presence of, as I refer to David Abdulah, as a walking archives for information and knowledge. And I will share with Ms. Maharaj, while I'm meeting her for the first time in person, I follow avidly your contribution. I find it to be very central to what we need to know as a people. Objectivity in your submissions that we as a public could learn to be analytical in our approach to things. And Mr. Johnson, who is a very good mentor and coach, quietly so, that teaching us how to analyze situation and contextualize what we see in our everyday lives. Mr. David Abdullah's bio is pretty long, pretty long, pretty long. I will try to shorten it. Because we want to give you your flowers while you're here, Mr. Abdulah. We don't want to skirt over your contribution to country and community. So David Abdulah, an economist by academic training, involved in the search for development of a popular and relevant pedagogy, a labor and political activist committed to social transformation and justice. David started his political activism as a student leader at the University of West Indies, St. Augustine, as a guild treasurer in 1973, 1974, and as a guild president in 1974. David spent 39 years at the OWTU, starting in 1977, which he held a number of positions, including Chief Education and Research Officer. I am a beneficiary of that time and phase, David, in that field. Executive Treasurer and General Secretary, the President of the Federation of Independent Trade Unions and NGO, fondly known as FITON. He was also the Industrial Relations Advisor to the West Indies Players Association. David is a founding member of the Movement for Social Justice that we call MSJ, and has been its political leader from 2012 to present. David has also served on several state boards, cabinet appointed and other national committees and advisory bodies, one of which was as the chairman of the Board of Governors of this august institution called Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. David has participated in and or led many other ad hoc civil society processes, including constitutional reform, Assembly of Caribbean People, Community Media for Development, and has contributed to public information and education through his previous role as a media commentator, newspaper columnist, and radio talk show host. And the list can go on. We want to thank you, Mr. Abdulah, for honoring us with your presence and coming to talk to us. Could we recognize Mr. Abdulah, please. Comrade Abdulah. Miss Sunity Maharaj, I want to be transparent. It took me a while to learn to pronounce it properly, so I hope I'm not butchering your name, because it's a bit of a tongue twister for me, because I speak pretty quickly, you'll recognize. Is a journalist and managing director of Caribbean Newsroom, a multimedia production and communications company. She's also a director of 2 NGOs, the Lloyd Best Institute of the Caribbean and the Caribbean Yard campus. She has served as an independent senator in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. Ms. Sunity Maharaj, while that bio that you gave us is a bit short, we know the impact of serving at that parliamentary level. And we trust more than ever, even now, that you will continue to serve and advise in that regard so that we can transition in a better and more meaningful way for our country. So thank you so much. Comrade Trevor Johnson, Senior Fellow, Cipriani College of Labor and Co-Operative Studies, member of the World Executive Board, UNI Global Union 2000 to present, Vice President, UNI Americas Regional Sector of UNI Global Union 2012, member of UNI Americas Finance Sector 2006, member of UNI Americas Regional Executive and Management Committee 2002 to present, Assistant General Secretary of, referred to as JTUM, Joint Trade Union Movement of Trinidad and Tobago, and Vice Chair of our ILO 144 Committee 2019. Heavy work, but sacrifice. And we want to say thank you, Mr. Johnson, that you continue to sacrifice and give so that working people could benefit from your sweat, your night sleep. We know you take a lot of night sleep. And still, Trevor Johnson also lectures in the college, in addition to all his portfolio that we've just mentioned. Let's recognize Trevor Johnson, please. Today, we are about relevance as a college. Small, meaningful, but impactful. And for that reason, we are asking these persons of worth and significance to speak to us on various issues, particularly the significance of working people being recognized on May Day and understanding its importance to Trinidad and Tobago and the region as a whole. So we will want Mr. Abdulah to give us a brief outline of the historical perspective from a global village perspective, even now, on how you see Labor Day evolving in Trinidad and Tobago, and more importantly, why should we recognize May Day, sorry. Labor Day. See, Labor Day is stuck in our head. For those of us that grow with Labor Day, I have had to do the research on May Day to understand the connectivity. So today is my day, Mr. Abdulah, to learn a bit more from you in terms of the historical perspective and May Day.
Thank you very much, Common Moderator, Sister Janice, and colleagues on the panel, and to all those who have joined online. I recognize the head of the Labor Studies Department, Ian Daniel, who said that he took part in a OWQ Labor Day quiz competition as a primary school student many moons ago. And he recalls that with some pleasure. So it was good that he got involved in answering questions about Butler in 1937. He is now head of the Labor Studies Department. Excellent. So May Day, the origins came out of the struggle in the late 1800s by workers, particularly in the United States, but also elsewhere in the world, against the horrible exploitative working conditions that they experienced. You had child labor, you had workers working for 70 hours a week, and of course if they fell sick, there was no sick leave, there were no benefits whatsoever. And so in 1884, one of the labor organizations in the United States, the Federation of Organized Trades and labor unions, had a convention in Chicago, and they passed a resolution saying that from the 1st of May 1886, there should be no more than a 40-hour work week. So the demand was for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, so that people would have time as workers to engage in their family life and other kinds of activities. And in 1886, there was a major strike movement that started on the 1st of May, 1886, throughout the United States, and hundreds of thousands of workers participated in this strike on that day, in furtherance of the demand for the 8-hour day, 40-hour work week. And there was an attack by the police in Chicago against the workers on the 1st of May, and a number of workers were killed and others were injured. And on the 3rd of May, workers decided to come out to protest that police repression of the strike movement and of the protest movement. And there was a clash. This took place in a part of Chicago. It was then known as Haymarket Square. And there was a clash again between the police and the protesters. A number of police officers were killed, and many of the workers and civilians were killed as well, and many were injured. And that then led to an international call by the Communist International, or the International Socialist Movement at the time, in 1889, I think it was, or 1891, where they then said that May 1st should be recognized as International Workers' Day, in recognizing that strike of the 1st of May, 1886. And so from then on, many groups of trade unions and workers in different parts of the world took on the 1st of May as International Workers' Day, and eventually a number of countries made it a public holiday. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, if I could just fast forward to Trinidad and Tobago, we did celebrate 1st of May, May Day, as our workers' holiday, International Workers' Day, and that was celebrated. And I recall people like John LaRose and Larocque telling me that May Day, for example, 1953 in San Fernando was exceptionally powerful, as you had the unity of a number of the trade unions, Oilfield Workers Trade Union, Federated Workers Union, and others, together with their political party, which was the West Indian Independence Party. It was a massive May Day gathering. And so we continued to celebrate May Day up until 1970, because the Black Power movement, or the February Revolution, as other people call it, which started on the 26th of February. There were huge mass demonstrations in Trinidad and Tobago from the 26th of February onwards. And then the Oilfield Workers Trade Union General Council passed a resolution saying that they would come out in large numbers of oil workers on the 1st of May, which was a holiday, as part of that movement that started on the 26th of February. And then on the 21st of April, there was the declaration of the state of emergency in Trinidad and Tobago, and trade union leaders, George Weeks, Clive Nunez, and leaders of NJAC were all detained and so on. Political detention took place, and therefore there could have been no May 1st in 1970. In 1972, early 72, Carnival was postponed. That's how we got Rainorama, right, with Kitchener, because that was my first Carnival in Trinidad. So Carnival got postponed to May, Mass in May. And so there was no May Day. There was no May Day in 1972 either, because there was also a state of emergency. People don't remember that. Yeah. But there was a second emergency from November 71 that ended in June of 72. And George Weeks and other leaders were again detained in that second emergency. So there was no May Day in 1972, and then the Williams government declared June 19th as Labor Day for Trinidad and Tobago. So there was a decline, or there were no activities around May Day for a number of years, and then Michael Alls, who was the leader of the Bank and General Workers Union at the time, he made a call to George Weeks and Joe Young and other leaders of the progressive trade union movement that we should once again celebrate May Day. And I don't remember the exact year. It was either 77 or 78. May Day, we started celebrating May Day again, and we used to have a rally, an indoor rally at the Transport and Industrial Workers Union Hall on Eastern Main Road in Laventille. And Rafiq Shah, who was the leader of the Island White Cane Farmers Trade Union, he would have been part of that. So you'd have had OWTU, Bank and General, ICFTU, TU, CW would have joined as well because Lyle Town had just taken over that union. The non-academic staff at UE, they would have also participated from memory. And so we had that indoor rally at TU Hall for a number of years. But then there were difficulties in the trade union movement. I'm not going to go into all those details. And so that stopped happening for a number of years. There was a group of workers and activists down in Mayaro, Guayagwari, who used to organize, when there was no trade union event, a march from Guayagwari to Mayaro every morning of May 1st. And that continued for a number of years. And then the OWTU revived it. And we had initially indoor meetings, and then eventually we started having demonstrations. And I didn't go and check the dates, which one started when, but we have been having demonstrations in San Fernando, certainly I think for the last 20 years or so. And we marched throughout the streets of San Fernando with those unions who would join with us in that. And that has become fairly significant, given that it's not a public holiday, but workers would take time off from their work to come and take part in that demonstration. So that's just a little bit of the history. And we've come to the current situation, I'm sure, later on.
Yes. Comrade, you all have anything you want to add? I know David gave us quite a history, which caused some questions to float around. I will ask those questions later on. But really and truly, it's good to really get a history, because when you don't know your history, it impacts the way you craft your future going forward and even how you behave today. As I said, we all can identify with Labor Day, but not May Day. As a child, May Day, you're playing the maypole and so on, but you really don't understand the significance of it. So one of the things I'm thinking is, should we not build a level of consciousness in the schools? Yeah. Not tertiary talking about now at the level of the child, so they can appreciate the struggle of the historians. Yeah? Yeah. So we're looking forward to the question and answer. Ms. Maharaj, I don't want to butch your first name because of my tongue, right? My question for you is, from a societal perspective, can you outline what the impact of the 8-hour workday is for us, for the average working person? And that's tying to what David told us about the struggle of that 8-hour workday, which is like, now we have people working 12 hours. How important you see that milestone of that 8-hour workday for the average working person and the community.
Well, it's a kind of obsolete idea. It worked for factory work in the period of the Industrial Revolution, where you have large numbers of people come out, cookie cutter operations, close the building, you go, and then you went into different shifts and so on. But in today's world, it's meaningless in that, first of all, it's impractical, given traffic, given it was a world when mothers were home mostly.
Yeah.
Now women are out working. You have children who have to be taken places. That is why so many people are trying to delink, and we talk about work from home.
Yeah.
That it is no longer, technology has transformed the workday. And if you're working 8 hours at work, you go home and you work the next 8 hours. Because you have a computer and they expect you to answer your emails. Those are all the kinds of issues that we are coming to. Yeah. Supposed to answer your emails, reply. It's putting a lot of pressure to say you have 8 hours and then you have to catch up and do more work before you get out again in the morning. So it's an idea whose time has passed, but it's still here until we face it up squarely and recraft our concept of what a life looks like. Not a living, but a life.
So you see it as impractical to hold on to this 8-hour day?
Yeah, it is stressful. It suits a production process that even that production process is not necessarily relevant. In an age of a lot of automation, in a seamless, your day is seamless. It's no longer, I'll wake up in the morning at so-and-so time, I have 2 hours to myself, or I cook and whatever some people do, send the children to school. You ask yourself, how did our parents with 10 and 12 children manage to bring up all these children, do well with them, and yet they got time to have a life with their friends in the community. And that is because they woke up like 5 o'clock, breakfast, organize everybody, send them to school. They may have no washing machine and 11 or 12 people to wash, put our clothes to soak, and then they will sit down and spend a little time with their neighbors who will pass by. And then they will get themselves ready for when the children come. And they go to bed earlier. The people went to bed 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, wake up, you get an 8 hours sleep in many cases. Try to get 5 hours sleep these days. Right?
Possible.
And life is different. It has been without our input, technology has reshaped our lives. The world is no longer that world of the industrial age of the Industrial Revolution, but it's taking us a long time to come to terms with taking a blank canvas and saying, in the context of our reality, what would be the ideal way to work?
Yeah.
So
Should
we have those old constructs, and we try to squeeze people into them. And the technology is really messing with, especially with women. Right? Because women, the world has never been redesigned for women. It is, you want to come out to work and be an independent woman? Well, this is the world as it is. Try to squeeze yourself there. When you go home, make sure that the dinner is ready for me and make sure the children are okay. And so, in other words, do everything that you were doing before, but here you will earn money and bring it. So we can't get away with that anymore. The extent of stress and impact it's having on people and on the quality of care for our children, which is the next generation. And in so many other ways, requires that we reconceptualize our world.
Yeah. Trevor, anything? Response? That sounds, but it's a reality. My boss, I came off the computer too this morning. I got email at minutes to 7, which I answered, and so I could relate. We could relate. So yeah, I'm thinking May Day, part of the struggle was our 8-hour work week. If we look at that same May Day approach and that struggle, what should we be lobbying for at this point in time? Just say, David?
Well, I think Sunity has raised a very fundamental question about how do we restructure society and in order to make people's lives better, given where we are with technology, and she's right in that regard. But there is a reality for many workers in Trinidad and Tobago today, including many women workers, for example, who are security guards, who work 12 hours a day without overtime pay, and who therefore have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and get out of the house by,
That's legal.
by 5, 6.
Is that legal?
No, it isn't.
Exactly.
The Minimum Wage Act specifies 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week.
Yes, so,
right? And so that is one of the problems of both the law, in terms not only of enforcing the minimum wage, but also the problem of those workers not being unionized, which is another discussion that we may have to have. But these women now will have to then get home very late in the evening, because you have to hustle transport. So if you finish work at 6 and you work 6 to 6, and then you get home at 8, 8:30, the time that you have with your family is zero, right? So there are real issues around that. And there are companies that now are seeking to change from an 8-hour day to a 12-hour day, although they may keep it in 40 hours a week. So a number of companies that have shift operations, particularly in the petrochemical sector, are trying to change the shift arrangements to 12-hour days, which the unions have always argued is neither safe nor productive, because you have people working long hours, their concentration ability spans are going to decline and so on, and you give rise to the potentials of accidents and so on. So there are issues around how do we deal with working time. And John LaRose, who I quoted before, many, many moons ago, talking about in the early 80s, used to say that given the technology then, which of course is very, very minimal compared to the technology now with AI and so on, but he argued that we now have to move to a 35-hour and even shorter working week, and argued for shorter working day, shorter working week, shorter working life, and more time for rest, recreation, and cultural creativity. because he said that the technology has increased exponentially the productivity of a worker, and therefore there's no longer any need to work those long hours. And what in fact has happened is that that increased productivity has just translated into bigger profits for a few and increasing income inequality.
And maybe we need to engage in consideration on flexi time, taking into account what is really eroding the 8-hour contribution to the employer organization. Hours can be staggered and still be maintained, within a framework. So both sides could look at the extent to which flexi time might be beneficial to working people and the world of work. Yeah? Trevor?
Well, just to mention a few things about May Day and its significance, because I know David did give us a really eloquent sort of transcript of the history of May Day, which is very important because I teach trade union leadership and trade union administration at the college, two different courses. And one of the things that is when we dealt with like mobilization for May Day and Labor Day, it's interesting that the majority of students here at the Labor College, and if I dare say, some in the majority of staff, when May the 1st arrived, it seems as if there's very little consciousness or significance attached to the fact that this is May Day. The average student, they work in the the 8-hour scenario. I know, of course, taken into account what Sunity has said, but the reality is you still find most collective agreements. Because trade unions have used the struggle for May Day and this fight for the 8-hour. And you would find that if you look at the average collective agreement in Trinidad and Tobago, it speaks to an 8-hour workday. And the intention was that Israeli was a protective element because they protect workers from the very things that David spoke about where people work in 10, 12, 14 hours, etc. So trade unions have found it necessary to put that in collective agreements, almost as a sort of check and balance against the possibility of this increase that was spoken about, pushing to 12 hours, etc. Even though I acknowledge in most of those 12-hour environments, which I know exist now, they would more often than not work what they call it now 24/7. You work, because some of these are like in Point Lisas, etc. With these plants, you work a 12-hour shift. I know personally people work them, but you work on average 4 days a week, and then you get 2 days off, and then you come back. But with those shifts, you don't. Those shifts are 24/7. That means you could be working on a Saturday, a Sunday, Christmas Day, New Year's Day, because when they do the schedule for those shifts, it doesn't take into account public holidays because the plant has to run, so that it just takes into account you are to work. You get your 4 days, but your 4 days could end up being over public holiday weekend, no time with your family, etc., etc. But you may be off 3 days in the middle of the week, but then your family is out, so it's kind of sometimes become meaningless because the time that you are off, it's not when the rest of your family might be available for some kind of recreation. But I just started with the issue that we have fought for this 8-hour workday. Historically, that's come down. And, it is said sometimes that trade union rights soon become social norms, and people don't necessarily connect the two, that people fought and died the Haymarket Square experience. People gave their lives for this struggle. But you talk to the average maybe young person today. Now, what they know is that if a company tells them, gives them a contract and it says 12 hours, they frown at it because somewhere in their consciousness they know, no, I suppose, no, 8. They go out and say, hey, Mom, Dad, they're giving me a contract and it says I have to work 6 to to 6 or something. They frown on it because they recognize that, no, that's not the social norm. The social norm is that I work 8 hours. So they're not really looking at it from a trade union or a labor, but they just, as far as they're concerned, it's my right to work 8. Why do they want me to work 9 hours or 10 hours, etc.? So young people are aware of it, or workers are aware of it from that perspective, but they don't necessarily connect it with the history of how we came to arrive at this 8-hour workday, which was, I think, is in the Australian working class had coined this phrase: 8 hours work, 8 hours rest, 8 hours recreation, which has, as Sunity has said, has been debunked now by the world of work is so different now. So that, but it's still important that there's some connectivity so people understand how we got to this 8-hour workday, 40-hour work week, and even as it evolves, whatever it evolves to, because we're now talking about the 4-day work week, the shorter work week, as David would have indicated. I know the last government administration would have been looking at the whole issue of remote work. Well, I don't know what's going to become of that, because some report was to have come out, and for them to look to determine whether some of the public service can go on remote work. And I know that's a whole other discussion, because on the whole issue of what is involved in remote work. And the last thing I would say is that on this is that, because Sunity alluded to it, is that we have the 40-hour work week, but research has shown that in the US, for example, the average person with technology is actually working at least 60 hours per week, because, and that is, therefore it means that they're working 20 hours unpaid overtime. Because as I said, they go home because you have all these gadgets. Because your phone is no longer a phone. Your phone is a computing device. It's no longer, people, it's no longer the correct terminology now. It can do a whole number of things. So that people are really on the bus home, in the car home, and wherever they're in the airport, wherever, and you're responding to you're sending a file that your office wants, etc., etc. You get up in the night to go to the bathroom, you see your phone ping, and you stop. Okay, five. Next thing you spend an hour in the study or something, or wherever you are in the home, and you realize that your 5 hours sleep now becomes 3 hours. So that's what the research have shown, that people are working actually longer than the 40-hour, 8-hour per day, 8-hour per day, 40-hour per week. And so that is something that we have to speak of, because on the one hand, we're talking a shorter work week, but unseen, I use as unseen in inverted commas.
So that's one of the questions that come in first.
So, yeah.
What really is the equivalent of the 8-hour work week? Because we still holding on to this approach of personal management. We just see you 8 hours as opposed to output, productivity. What really is the equivalent of the 8 hours? Because some of this stuff, let's say, that Sunity could do at home, she's required to take the traffic and all of the stress to get to the office to do the very thing that she can do at home and deliver in time and on time, and save that 3-hour or 4-hour transit and stress and frustration and sometimes meeting road rage, and still be able to balance what we talk about work-life balance. It's, I mean, there's another curveball, but we have to look at when we say 8-hour work day, what exactly we equating that to?
Well,
How do we measure?
The question is, why are we measuring performance by hours? Okay, and a reasonable world would be one in which you quantify what you'd expect for a certain amount of money in terms of output, and the arrangements for doing so. There are some jobs that actually require to be physically in a place.
Yes.
And there are jobs that don't require.
Like security.
Right. And that is an important element of this discussion, because it is the lowest income person who is always going to be exploited the most, because their need is so desperate and because the options are so few.
Yes.
So if you have an option if they say, well, you have to work 12 hours and it's illegal, and you went to report it, you don't have a job.
Yeah.
That's right.
You're going to be just blacklisted all over. Everybody will say, don't worry with her or him. So our laws, all laws should be above all to protect the weakest, not the necessarily strongest. Strongest can often take care of themselves. They could fly out in their private plane and, go see about themselves. So so a reasonable world is one that should be led by common sense. Even so, however, work from home is not as just and as convenient as we might think, because many companies are now able to cut down their investment in the big building that they had to house everybody, and all the things that they purchase, the soap, the tissue, the water, the coffee, and you stay home, and you are going to cover that cost. Your house is now part of the office rented. The costs are transferred to you.
Yes.
And so you have to now think about what is a fair relationship when we move from working in an office and working from home, because my home becomes your
The
property.
workplace. What's
to
the
some
exchange?
extent, right? Exactly. So it's not as, but some people are so happy to be home, especially women again, because they can be home, they can cook, type, call in and check out everything is okay, feel safer as well, because they're in their house compared to being on the road, take out the stress, that they're glad to give up the certain things that actually they ought to be entitled to, which is what are the allowances when I turn my home into space. Sometimes using their own computers at home and all the other facilities. And your room for profit margin is increased. You could even take the office building and rent it out, right? And bring in income. So those are things I think that the world is, but I want to make a connection between May Day and our Labor Day.
Yeah, yeah.
Because our Labor Day is very strictly related to our experience and what achievement we made as a people in 1937. The start of organized labor. We had workers' agendas before going into the 19th century. I mean, from resistance, from the beginning, all right? And the working people's alliances and so on that was started, working men's associations, and that came into the 20th century. I mean, there's a long history. So our labor movement didn't start in 1937. Organized trade unions started then. So there's a whole long history before that. And that is a story everybody ought to know that comes through their pores. What is it I am the beneficiary of today? But increasingly, you're going to see that we'll be talking about Labor Day, and that is because that's an international workers' platform. And the globalized economy is and globalization of technology and capital is now putting all workers on the same platform dealing with the same issues. The issues we're talking here about the construct of the workplace, what is fair, work from home, impact of automation, AI, and all these factors, it's the same thing everywhere. So that there is a May Day, you can feel like a worker on the planet, in common with all workers. On Labor Day, that's our story. And so it's not a choice of either one or the other, it's both. And in fact, anytime you could get it, you have the opportunity to focus on that, on justice, fairness, and what is your fair share for what you put out as a worker, and the people who appropriate that value and become billionaires, and is that fair, and how is the power system designed to view that and to reward or not reward? That is, you should take the chance to open up that conversation.
Well, Hannah, you preempt one of the questions directed at you. I'm sitting here and I'm just nodding my head because I wanted to still ask the question. How can labor institutions and unions strategically use media and education to reshape the public narrative around May Day, workers' rights, especially for the younger audience? the young persons who are entering into the world of work, because there's a disconnect. Yeah. So able to relate to it and understand why they should be part of this struggle to ensure that we get our just due from that world of work. Because no, you're not even hearing workers' rights, you're hearing because the employers have issues as well. But we've had the conversation with that transfer of cost of operation to the worker in a case of work from home, with the perception that you having it easy now, you don't have to leave home. But really and truly, when you leave home, you switch off all your expenses, turn off your lights, turn off your AC, and so on. So the question is it a time for us to start to use the platforms, media, all forms of media, to really build back that focus and build a momentum on addressing the issues that are facing us today?
Yeah, I think Sunity has placed the issue of today very squarely in this discussion. And she's absolutely right, because you now have what is popularly called a precariat. So whereas before you had workers in permanent jobs and so on, collective agreements, certain kinds of securities and that kind of thing, the majority of workers now are short-term contracts, 6 months, 1 year contracts, very insecure. And then you have what is now called the gig economy, where people work to do a specific project at a particular point in time, or they may be involved in some creative activity and they get something now and then 3 months, nothing. So there's a lot of insecurity of workers, and that is global. That is global. And in fact, that insecurity of workers has helped to drive a populist response to that, like a Trump and all the other developments in Western Europe and so on, in Argentina, where people make these statements that it is the other person who is causing your misery, which is the immigrant and so on, or people of color in many cases. So, and that drives a whole culture of racism and xenophobia and fear. Now, in this context, therefore, and given what I think is really a collapsing world order of neoliberal capitalism, although it is still powerful, and you have the Musks and all these people who are multi-billionaires, but that model has proven to be a failure, given the inequalities, given the insecurities and so on that have taken place in the world today. And therefore, now more than ever, and I said this in my May Day message, that the trade union movement has to focus on a lot of public education as well as internal education, so that workers could understand and get back that sense, which is what May Day was supposed to be about in the first place, in that International Workers' Day, of unity and solidarity. Because one of the features of our world today, which was quite a deliberate social re-engineering, was to create the culture of individualism that I could see about myself. I think it was Tony Watkins I first heard saying, A for apple, B for bat, and C for yourself, right, as a different alphabet. So in this context, we have to restore a sense of solidarity and unity and understanding of what is taking place globally, And I mean, I throw this out because I know when many moons ago, when I was involved in education work in the union, we used to have people from South Africa, from Namibia, from the ANC and from SWAPO and different organizations coming to talk about their international struggles. And we had solidarity movements around that and so many other issues. We had people coming down from the UK, from the National Union of Mine Workers, to talk about what Thatcher was doing in the UK. So we were trying to build an understanding amongst our membership of global developments. And I don't hear that from the trade unions again, sadly. Like what is happening, say, in the Sahel, the countries of the Sahel, and what significance of that to us, Burkina Faso and so on and so on. What's happening in Gaza? So a few people might come out, but will the average branch officer, shop steward, go outside the US Embassy with a placard talking about genocide? No, because people are afraid they lose their visa, right? So we have to get back that type of sense of global solidarity and recognize that what is happening with multinational corporations and the whole process of globalization, in fact, should enable us to make those types of connections of solidarity, internally inside Trinidad and Tobago, regionally, and globally.
All right. One of the questions coming in said the Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway are working a 30-hour work week. How do we explain this, if we can? Because we look for comparators, we compare to the US and Europe and so on.
But that is prevalent, actually, in the trying to bring in a more humane relationship with workers. I mean, those are the countries that led paternity leave, a much longer period of maternity leave for women. I think about a year or so. You know, because when you begin to understand that a lot of the problems that we have is really because we are not paying enough attention to the children, right? And mothers are torn between. You have to be on the work. Remember, if you were to get pregnant, companies didn't want you. You know, you just want women who pass that. You're not going to have children. A lot of women actually, work is so heavy, so demanding, they forego having children.
Yeah.
And so when you start to count the cost in the alienation of youth alienation, children, the latchkey kids as they call them, who they have a key to go in the house and, you know, the microwave, or they go in the shop and buy something. I know children whose mothers are working as security guards, come home at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the children pick up a few cents and they go in the shop, buy a sweet drink and a kiss cake, and that's their breakfast. But that is the reality, because how? You probably had a whole day's work, you get a little nap, then you start looking after your house and the children come in from school and all of that. That is the stress. And when you see the consequences for your society, and when people organize themselves, they recognize this is a problem, and you are organized, you can challenge the system and ask for better. And so you do have in Europe, you have, you know, the center, your right, your left, you have socialist policies, and it's about a more humane, you know, relationship between, you know, workers and employers and so on. So, you know, that's where when they put the categories of happiest people in the world, I think it's Trinidad. I think, is anybody happier than us? But it's always Finland or something like that, right? Yes, Finland, I think, has been named every year. I want to know what makes them so happy.
Probably work-life balance.
It is, you know, it is. And it's also different things, a whole different concept of education.
Yeah.
Different, you know, you're not, you know, you have rules about, you know, how many cars, you know, what hours you work. You know, the point I was making about a common sense approach to life, right? Why do you have to be? If I have to be on the road, I will be on the road after hours. I don't mind driving in the night. I could just be easy, right? I'm easy, relax, no traffic. Daytime is too hot. There's too much traffic, too much people.
Mr. Johnson, there's a question coming in here for you. How can unions today effectively challenge the increasing normalization of excess working hours, especially in sectors where workers feel they have little choice but to comply?
Well, it's a number of factors there, because unions have always, in one sense, one might argue, challenged those things. Of course, in a unionized environment, that's, you know, you have collective agreements that will offer that sense of protection. One of the things we need to consider in our region, not just Trinidad and Tobago, is we talk about, you know, low unionization. But in the European Union, for example, the European Union have legislated and discussed that by, I think this year, 2025, at least 80% of the workforce must be covered by collective bargaining, which implies, of course, that they have to be unionized. So they didn't use the word unionization, but they say you have to be covered by collective bargaining. We live in an environment where there's a constant struggle and battle against worker protection and workers being covered by collective bargaining. And in fact, our very laws that you know, the legislation that governs, you know, the workplace, the whatever, 18 or 20 key pieces of legislation that govern the workplace. Most of them are 70, 80 years old. So just to begin with, we are starting from a point of view where the workers' protection is compromised by the fact that the legislation is archaic, outdated, and that we have worked with, challenged by government. In the last 10 years, there have been no labor legislation brought before Parliament. But even if you take the term before that, because I'm not just speaking about one government administration. If you go back, probably 20, 30 years, you can check to see how many pieces of, substantial pieces of labor legislation has really come before Parliament. Maybe the OSH Act might be, and that in itself is now 20 years old, and it's still outdated. So we have this issue. I know the question speaks about the trade unions, but it's not just a matter of the trade unions. It's how, as Sunity might say, how do we as a society and our people want to engage so that we have laws that are, our laws must not always be like trying to catch up, which is what basically it seems to be. So we have to deal with that. And that opens up the whole question of our laws for organizing. It's easy to join a trade union, but to get recognition, it's like rockets. It is like rocket science. It seems as if the process is deliberately designed, and those with other interests, the capitalist class, they have no interest in freeing up this bottleneck system of things. So that, which is why May Day, coming back to May Day and Labor Day, but May Day is internationally and universally recognized as International Workers' Day. In fact, in checking earlier, I found that at least at over 160 countries celebrate or recognize May Day. Some of them as a public holiday, some as an observance. And in some places, the government itself basically becomes part of the May Day celebrations. In Antigua earlier this week or last week, they had their May Day celebrations, and some countries use it to make pronouncements, or government make pronouncements. So even some governments have come to recognize that this is a landmark or a benchmark that we can use to listen to the grievances or the advocacy of trade unions. And it really needs to become in Trinidad and Tobago. That is May Day, just as we get, I know Labor Day is a public holiday, but we really need to begin to profile May Day and what is intended for a bit differently. It's not just about the 8-hour workday, because that is almost passé. It's about workers' struggle and for the advance of workers' interests in the country, in Trinidad.
That takes me to a very interesting question that it's here, but I think it's in the minds of everybody panel. A member of the trade union movement has been appointed as Minister of Labor, as has been done before. Given the experience of the trade union movement with former ministers of labor, which produced little or no tangible results for working people. And that really raised the question of the old adage, when those who labor hold the reins of power, does it sound like an empty refrain? Because those who are labored held the reins of power, but how has it redounded to the benefit of working people?
When was it that those who labor? No,
I think they refer to the fact that they held an office or a portfolio of Minister of Labor.
Well, this is the point I'm making. In our system, the only powerful person is the Prime Minister. And, you just put somebody out of a cabinet tomorrow if they don't comply. It's as easy as that. So, it comes back to the whole construct of the Constitution and the distribution of power within the Constitution and so on. So, I think I'm just being facetious, but you know what I mean.
No, but you're right, and I would agree with you, because because one ministerial office does not power make, right? And we saw that certainly between 2010 and 2015, although my own view is that more could have been done in that period, and that opportunity was really not grasped, okay? The 2015 to 2020 period, quite clearly, there was no impetus or interest by the cabinet to pass any labor legislation. Jennifer Batiste Primus had tons of consultations. I retired from the union more or less in that time. So Trevor must have gone to endless consultations at the Hyatt or wherever on this law and that law and that law, and nothing happened, right? Absolutely nothing. Not a single piece of labor legislation was actually tabled in Parliament in 9.5 years, in 10 years. So that means that because politics is really about the pursuit of your interests. And in our society, like in all societies, you have different interests. And given the class nature of our society and the traditional power structures, people who control economic power, it's not in their interest to have those kinds of reforms. And therefore, even if you have a well-meaning, assuming there's a well-meaning Minister of Labor who understands the need and he puts something forward, there'll be other people who say, no, that's not important, we have other things, other more important things to fish to fry. So in this context now, there's a slightly different dynamic. I'm not saying it's a completely different dynamic, so I'm not suggesting Labour is holding the reins now. But there now are 3 ministers who have come from the trade union movement who are sitting there. So it is going to be an interesting thing to see what emerges in terms of labor legislation. And my view is that the trade union movement now can't simply sit back and say, okay, we've made a step forward. The trade union movement and others in the society have to now keep insisting that whatever was committed to in terms of labor law reform is in fact implemented, right? That the price of freedom, as I said in my May Day press release, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
But the question...
But I want to say there's another difference with this government this time, and it's not even in the cabinet. The intervention of the president of the PSA is very important. And it is because, and I'm only judging from her platform appearances, she clearly negotiated terms of association with the political party before.
For working people.
When she came with her members, which tells me that she got that discussion going with her union, got the endorsement and the position that we are going to negotiate our vote with whoever is going to give us. And so it was a negotiation. Then the most critical thing she did is every single time she spoke, she made it clear to the party she's supporting and to the public the terms of that. Minimum 10%, no revenue authority, no whatever.
Checklist.
Too often in the past, Labour has gone into these arrangements. But first of all, the membership is not consulted enough to say we are taking our members in with there, and membership has very little voice to say, no, we don't want that. The leaders go in. The terms of association are very general. It's not clear what did you associate. So this is politics. When it's politics, you have to tell the public, we are going on these terms, because if it doesn't work for us, we are out of there. Yes. And if you don't do that, when you go in and start to make your terms, the talk starts, they're miserable, this one trying for a grab for power, whatever, and the other people just say, you see, that you can't get along with them, and then you just become part of history. In this case, let the government say they're not giving that minimum 10%, whatever. Then she can say to her entire membership, we are moving out. And if she moves out, we have the history in 1990, or when the PSA was on the march. In other words, this is what representation looks like. It is not leadership alone, behind closed doors, negotiating. And you have to have, even if you think it's a good thing, if your membership say no, you can't go, because you represent. So you take your workers with you and you take your workers out of you. Yeah. So I think the real power in the labor dynamic in this government is really outside, because the government has to be very careful about not honoring a pledge that was publicly stated every single time.
Yeah. Let me just say that, just for the historical record, in 2010, we had a massive conference of shop stewards and branch officers prior to the MSJ going into the partnership. Trevor, you were probably there?
Yeah.
We probably had about 600-700 people from across the unions, and these were first and second rank. It wasn't just the leadership. And it was an all-day session, and several presentations were made. And one of the presentations was actually on the agenda that we wanted to take into the partnership, and we got a mandate for that particular agenda. It was a detailed written agenda. It came out of a 2009 protest action that we had, that when we had a whole list of demands. We developed that agenda right here in Cipriani College, actually. Yes. So there was a detailed set of issues.
And that was shared with the national public.
Yeah, all those things have been made public. They were made public from 2009, long before the partnership, long before elections were known, right? When we had the People's Democracy, that's what the name of it was. And we had a public meeting in Woodford Square. Dennis Pantin was part of that with the CRF and a whole group of us. And we had a very long list of issues coming out of civil society, including the trade unions and so on. And yeah, so the things were known, and those things were MSJ members on the drafting of the manifesto of the partnership had those things included, many of them in the manifesto. And that is why when I made a statement in early 2012, mid-2012, around April 2012, that the commitments that were made are not being kept, MSJ will now want to see them being kept within 3 months, or otherwise we will review our position. So there was a process, right? So I just wanted to say that. No, they were not as few in terms of like 10% and so on. The demands were much broader, but they were very specific as well in terms of labor legislation reform and things like that. So there was an agenda. So I just wanted to say that for the record. But what I think is of significance this time around is that you had two people winning seats that had not been won by the UNC ever, right? Because the NER was one that won those seats in 1986.
86, yes.
And the persons who won were not coming out of the ULF component of the NER. It was Albert Richards in Palo Seco in Labre, and Selby Wilson in Point Fortin, and they would have come out of the ONR element component and so on. So I think that those two seats were key in terms of giving the trade unions now, the labor movement, a certain amount of leverage going forward. So there's a different dynamic.
Yeah, I don't want to understate. I don't.
Yeah. So I'm just
I
saying
don't want to
that
understate the value of those two.
Yeah.
But the history of having trade union representatives in government suggests that, and not just trade union, anybody who is not the prime minister, just like Jennifer Batiste, just like McLeod. McLeod was a minister of labor and one of a fiery trade union leader. But you just can be shut down. Even the great George Weeks in the Senate, because the power is so centralized in the prime minister that just being in a cabinet, and I think it's very important that there are two people there, and especially at this time when they would
have three now because Batiste is there as well, so there's three.
He's not an MP, but he's there. He's there.
Oh, okay, right. Okay.
All
right, okay.
Yeah, so there's three.
So that the confidence in carrying forward labor agenda inside of the party, inside of the cabinet, that is going to be crucial, as opposed to go in and say, well, collective responsibility. The majority says this, and you have to go along.
Yes.
And you have to know, what is my mandate in there? Yes. And are you prepared
to stand up?
Yeah. And do you have a relationship with the public and keep the public in your confidence, while at the same time honoring to the extent
but
that is reasonable.
That brings me back to the question we talk about public education. Because one thing we need to factor in to change labor legislation, the majority that is required would have required voting from across the island in some circumstance and situation. In this season here, the government of the day have the requisite majority. All right? if they partner with the 2 seats from Tobago, they have more than the 2/3. Without, they have a 3/5 majority. So now are we in a space where we're willing to, or we're prepared to educate the public that no longer can we play the blame game, because we've had opportunities where the requisite majority was had and you didn't need votes from across the aisle, and yet Labour legislation remained archaic. We also had a situation where Labour held the prime ministership in Bastille Pandey, who was the prime minister. And therefore, from where we are sitting, some of us discussing it in our classroom, the voice of the union has gone conspicuously quiet. And those are some of the questions coming in from some of the students who are on the platform in terms of decreased membership. How is that impacting autonomy of the union? Engaging the young people and seeing there's an interest in joining the labor struggle, because the forefathers did that and they were able to pull a people together and lobby for what working people deserve. Is it the season now to say, listen, there can be no blame game across the aisle? Labour has played a significant role in changing what was considered a very oppressive system, oppressive governance. And now the PSA-led union was able to make and I agree, a significant impact by educating the people on the platform. I don't think much campaigning had to be done from a party politics perspective. From where we are sitting, Labour spoke about governance and what they were not getting through the president of PSA. We are asking, what can we do to rebuild that sense of consciousness and struggle and build that awareness? And how can we keep the history and the principle and the concept of May Day alive so that working people will understand, not just for one day, but going forward throughout, that the movement, it's a movement that we need to fortify and build so that capital will not oppress labor the way they're doing it.
Okay, one I think quick observation I think is important now, because there was a colleague of mine from Labour in the Caribbean who said, regardless of what the construct of a government is, or if Labour, you have ideally the first 6 months of an administration to make your demands and to begin to get some traction. Because he says once 6 months passes or into a year, you get the as David said, the pursuit of interest.
So no honeymoon.
Yeah, so I'm just saying Labour has had some strong input in these elections. There is a momentum. We have like Labor Day we just came out of May Day. Labor Day is coming up, and there has to be a strong the public education has to be ongoing. It has to continue. There should be possibly COSABOs. A COSABO before Labor Day. A continuing building of that momentum, because one of the dangers sometimes of we haven't really in a sense achieved anything yet, but we have just arrived. And when I say we have not, it's not collectively Labour, but in office. But sometimes you can be seduced by the trappings of office. And Labour has to, those elements of Labour that are representative within government and also in their respective unions, there has to be that push and momentum now, and not that kind of posture, well, we win these 2 seats and, these 2 really hard-won seats, or, we have, there have been ministerial appointments. That's not the end game. The end game is that there are things that the working class of Trinidad and Tobago is looking towards, and that is what we have to pursue. The end game is not a cabinet appointment. The end game is not a minister, worse yet, a minister in the ministry of, because at that, you're not even cabinet level with that appointment. So Labour has to be still very conscious, has a sharp edge. Labour has to be aware. And it's not impossible that we can seek to make a push, but I'm conscious of what Sunity said about the prime ministerial dictatorship. But I think we're in a position where some leverage has been had, and what we need to do is hold on to that leverage and advance on it, as opposed to being comfortable, right? We can't be enticed by the black car and all of that. No, these things, if you're careful, yeah, because quite frankly, they said that one of the former labor ministers, they got seduced by those things, and you cannot be seduced by those things. That is not, yeah, so that's a tool to do your job. It's not like, this status thing that way, you know what I mean? So we have to be careful. We have to be aware.
Do you think it would be too frontal for labor to come together and propose a legislative agenda in terms of reform of our IR framework?
Well, I think one was
parity listing.
There is an agenda that labor has with going into these, and that is still very, very valid, and it even comes down from that, in a sense, from that 2009 document. And then there was the workers' agenda, which is still a valid document, and there was a labor element of the government manifesto that labor has to make sure that it's these elements. I think a 20-point agenda was crafted, and labor has to make sure that it sticks to this. We must be able to tick off. I'm not naive here to suggest that every one of those will be accomplished. I'm not that naive, but I'm saying we have to be able to hold the government and even our labor colleagues to account. Where are we with this? Where are we with so we have maybe 20 pieces of legislation, but there are 4 that are key, or 4 or 5. Where are we with those? We need to begin to hold people to account, including the government, so that it will really be everybody wins. Cannot just be a slogan. The working class must win in this too. If not, what were we in it for?
For change and not exchange.
I think that we have to, when you promise people-centered government, we have to think through what does people-centered mean, and how does that feed into the entire society. We also have to look at what a worker is, what is working class, what is trade unionism in the context of an evolving landscape, and then design a society for that. So when we talk about people-centered, we look at the reality of this country, and we know that a lot of young people in particular, in the gig economy, right? Trade unions don't deal with the gig economy. You have your little 3 months, you get another project, but can trade unions evolve to represent those people? If I am working and I'm a freelancer, I have problems of contract. Somebody who did not pay me in time, somebody who did not whatever. I need services. I can't afford a big lawyer, but I know a union for a little fee, for a monthly fee, will represent me. And do we go to the industrial court or a small claims court or what? In other words, I think the economy and the society, they are evolving, and the trade union needs to see itself as a repository of knowledge, of capacity to deal with all those people, whether or not you're categorized as a worker. I, for one, anytime anybody asks me in the media a problem, I'm a freelancer, and I know they want to fire me, and I don't have any rights, I say, check bank and general insurance, Big O, right? I say, go to Maria's, go to you, because I know what resided for me in Big O was the highest quality representation in the industrial court. And those guys knew the law inside out. And I want that to be, and I see that is a captive, growing need. Small businesses, everybody, the business might be 1 person, 2, 3 people, but they have contracts and they have terms, and they don't have the kind of money to go to the courts, and therefore they always suffer. They don't get paid. They shut down. Can they be represented by trade unions, and can the trade union evolve to represent and put its capacity, because they're also losing members.
Yes.
They're losing members, and the members are there, but they're not called workers, right? That is one thing to look at. But then we have to consider the reconstruction of the economy so that people can access finance and all kinds of move from micro or cottage to small to medium, and therefore the people's financial systems, like credit unions, have to reconsider the way they have been moving along to try to become banks.
Banks, yes.
Right? The
Definitely.
executives are like bank executives. You are there, you have so much liquidity. You have people with needs and you have people with cash. I want to be a hairdresser, but I don't have the money. Do you have somebody who is a credit union member who you can see on their portfolio have a lot of cash, getting a little bit of interest, and you say, why don't we put you all together? Why you are interested in investing in a small business? And bring this person, because they're a really good hairdresser, bring them together, give them the kind of support. The credit unions can have that, all the governance training, all the things that come into law and so on. And you start a little business, before you know it, you have a real business. And that is this society is very different from a lot of other societies. I'm talking about Caribbean societies. There is a yearning for people. They don't want to work in a public service. That is for security. They want to go home and do something different. And that's why half of the time they're too tired to work, because they go home and they're braiding hair, they're cooking and selling, whatever it is they're doing, right? And they're painting, because freedom is so powerful in our DNA. We want to be economically independent, but the financial system is not designed for supporting the small person, no matter how much little small, whatever it is, governments always put, it is not structurally there for you. And so we have to consider really economic transformation from a very deep, deep way into this. And that's people-centered. And you can't just be having a slogan. You have to say, how do you take that concept and make it real and transformational?
Yeah, it's fundamental. And I mean, some of it requires actual changes in the law, so that the IRA, for example, Industrial Relations Act, will have to be amended to change what a definition of a worker is. So other than that, if you get to the industrial court and you're not defined as a worker, you're not getting inside the door. So those are the kinds of reforms that are necessary. But I agree that the approach to the reforms has to be an approach that takes into consideration where we are at now as a society. And what really we're talking about, what kind of society do we want to have?
That's right.
That is really the fundamental question. And similarly with the credit unions, because credit unions can't lend for certain kinds of things like businesses and so on. So some of those things also have to be changed. Yes, you could lend an individual member, and the member might be able to do something with that. But there are certain others. If the member sets up a company, you can't lend to the company, and so on. So there are things that institutional arrangements which have.
And the question is, why were those things put into the law in the first place?
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
You can give them laws to go on a cruise. Money to give them on a cruise, consumption.
Right, yes.
But production,
No.
to productive enterprise, which is which is economic. Right?
That is because the people who have traditionally controlled the economy have access to the banks and so on.
That's right.
And therefore, other people who need access to capital can't get it from the banks, but are frustrated from getting it elsewhere. So it comes again to the question of who has power and how is that power used, and what does the state, how does those in control of state power, how do they use the power to bring about the fundamental changes?
And that's why we have talked about, it cannot be a slogan.
That's right, yeah.
Making people-centered government real.
But I don't think that when people talk about that, they're really talking about doing things on the margin to help people. But I think most people, when parties or governments say that they want people-centered, they're not really thinking about fundamentally
They're not talking about the center.
No, not where power lies. They don't want to change the structure of power.
Well, I call that the imperative of mainstreaming the maroon. In other words, we are all maroons here. Those of us who we're not central to power. We're operating all the important things in this country going on the outside. And we are maroons, we're doing a little teaching, you know, for the community, a little football team here, a little whatever it is, propping up a dysfunctional society when all of those energies and impulses ought to be at the center of the society. It has to become the mainstream. And I do not accept that the people who are doing the most important things should be doing it while you can sit down in the middle there and you have your hand on the treasury and you have the right to make laws and you're just getting away doing nothing, and all the heavy lifting to keep the society afloat falls on the shoulders of people with the least. They're looking after children, homeless people, sick people. That's the communities that keep us going. While large sums, billions are going into different social services and so on, and all you're seeing is growing homelessness, growing poverty. Something is wrong.
Our accountability framework.
So
And
these
we've been
people who are
hearing-
doing things, they have to be in the center.
We've been hearing constitutional reform as a buzzword, but maybe we need to really put that as number one on the agenda as well in terms of referendum and that kind of thing.
But you were talking about
And
public
write a report,
education.
I would say probably we need to look at it.
You were talking about the importance of public education, and you said about we. The question sometimes, I don't know who is the we who could teach, because so many people who are at the top of the society don't know anything about the society. And that's a fact. And that is because the education system
It's designed particularly.
is still the thing that the colonials left us, and it's still about certification. And people come out of the country and don't even know beyond where they leave home and they go to work, and that, you know, you become a minister of something and you never went, right? You're hearing, I'm a minister of this, and I don't want to say things because people will know who I'm talking about, but never heard about it before until they become a minister. And you can't blame them, because the rat race for certification that even the parents are caught in it. If you were to say, look at how people fought against the decentralization and zoning of schools, because there were few, the ones with the brand names. I want my child go there. Look at the problem we have now. They're afraid to send their children from where they're home to Port of Spain because it's going to be the same schools have now threatened. You have to be in the traffic, you're worrying about your child, you have to leave work, pick up your child, go and go back to work. When if your child was home, if you had a community close by, your child could go. And so there's so much fear and insecurity and anxiety, but we all do not do a good enough job of you're not talking to people, right? People are not talking to people, and I think, and this is a good time to say that I have been a senator, but I won't be a senator from a new term, because I think the best use of my time is in community engagement. I think the best use of all our time is to spend as much time talking,
Empowering communities.
understanding, not talking at people, talking with people, learning about people and people learning from us, because ultimately our salvation is really a more informed citizenry and more empowered individual. We are too scared. The people with the greatest privilege for it to speak, and they're leaving the least to go and march on their behalf, and if they get through, well, everybody will get through.
Yeah.
But when you have people feel they have too much to protect,
Yes.
and they're just scared.
Don't want to lose.
Yeah. If I could just come
Mr.
back, I don't know how much time we have. I'm sure you're getting close to the end time.
Very
Yes, but that coming back to June 19th or 1937, not May Day, but our Labor Day. You know, the labor movement of the day, and Sir Arthur Lewis wrote a very important, he wasn't Sir in those days, Arthur Lewis wrote a very important pamphlet called Labor in the West Indies, which was written just after 35, 36, 37, 38. So it was written probably late 38, early 39, when he was in London as part of the Fabian Society. And New Beacon Books, John Rose, republished it with an afterword by Susan Craig. It's a very important publication for everybody to read and understand, because the labor movement, which was ordinary working class people, yes, there were a few others who would have been educated and so on, but essentially working class people had a clear agenda for not just individual territories, because we're all colonies, but for the West Indies. And they had a vision, and they were writing essentially on a blank canvas. I mean, with the background of the struggles of the past, but they set out an agenda with a vision about how the economy, because they talked about ending the control of sugar plantations by large companies and breaking them up into for small farmers, a whole range of things that were identified and so on in that agenda. So we are now at another moment in the crisis of global capital, the crisis of the world, of technology and so many transformations and insecurities. We are at another moment when the labor movement has the opportunity to identify, and by the labor movement I'm not just talking about trade unions, talking about generally, has the opportunity to identify and articulate a vision and an agenda for the future. I think that's where we are. That really is the major challenge in my view. It's not only about the immediate, that is one, but what kind of society do we wish to have? In my view, that is a fundamental question. And the repudiation of the PNM in the last elections was a repudiation of the type of society that Dr. Rowley and the others were not just creating, but were reinforcing and strengthening, which was a society of great inequality, of great hardships for the majority of people, of exclusion from decision making, of being ignored, of people not feeling that their lives were important, whereas the lives of the elites were important. So it was a repudiation of that. But that has not necessarily been replaced by a vision of what it should be. I think that is a real challenge now.
And therefore we collectively have a responsibility to keep discussions such as these alive, because a lot of persons, I'll take for instance my example in my classroom, a lot of persons ask, then if all these political scientists are aware of the impact of structural adjustment on our economy and governmental decision, why when they're doing their brief and analysis, you don't hear it from them in the round table and the media? You had students literally asking that question, saying, well, they're now getting an understanding of why they use the old adage, things change but it remain the same, because it doesn't matter who is in office.
Just to remain
the same thing. And therefore we see ourselves as an institution, as I agree with your community service, because you have to start a conversation around your dinner table, in your home, in your community, and build back that level of sensitization as to what the working people's struggle is. You know, as I said earlier when we started, I'm aware of Labor Day. I work very hard on the fights on Labor Day. But the appreciation for me just went back to my childhood. I never really took time to relate to it. So doing this in and of itself opened some awareness, not just for me, but for the students as well, because we carry over these discussions in the classroom. And I think it's a good place for us to start. I want to encourage us to continue the conversation in our own space and as much as possible. Media now is not monopolized, in my respectful view. We have so many platforms now that we can use. Social media has opened up the media stranglehold on what the narrative is. So yes, you are getting mainstream media on one side or the other, but you still have avenues that we can do little blogs and so on and keep the discussions going in this regard. So I don't know if Mr. Johnson, you have any final word for us, having heard from on the discussion.
Just to say, from a perspective of like a labor, speaking here more from a labor perspective, I think I want to identify with the need for there to be now an articulated, clear vision that goes beyond, say, the rhetoric of elections. And even, well, I mean, we have to consider, we must have included, consider the entire society. There are those who are imbued by the euphoria of the result, that's fine, but there are those, of course, who would be disappointed because they were, they were not, they were disappointed by the result, but they are still part of the citizenry. They are still part of the working class of Trinidad and Tobago. So we need to be able to articulate a vision that is for the working class, regardless of, what the result of the elections, where the elections have come and gone. But we have a working class. The working class has not come and gone. The working class, they need to understand the significance of May Day, the issues that arise, the significance as we move towards Labor Day. There will, in a sense, always be a working class, but what we want is a working class has been said, that is not excluded, that does not feel that they are left out, etc. So I think what we're looking towards, beyond just the academic understanding or appreciation of May Day and Labor Day, as we move towards Labor Day, is really the significance for the working class and the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, I kind of like to put you on the spot almost immediately, coming out of one of the questions asked. Having had the conversation, understanding labor in and of itself divided, because we have some labor leaders don't want to go on the same platform and the other one and so on. Is it not a time now to pull labor together to design that strategic approach to rebuilding the autonomy of the trade union movement?
Well, at present, the three federations, there are three labor federations, the Joint Trade Union Movement, the National Trade Union Center, and the Federation of Independent Trade Unions. And actually, from a federation point of view, the three federations do try to operate on a unified basis. I'm not saying that each individual union may be in the same place, but at the federation level, there's that consideration for having a common approach, and that's a start. Globally, whatever country you go to, there will always be differences between unions, etc. And so you're never going to have a perfect element. But at present, where we are, there is I suppose, an element of commonality in terms of the federations willing to cooperate on some elements of labor, and I think that is where you have to start. It's not perfect, it's not everything that everyone agrees on, but we can continue to build and at least talk, and at least that is happening.
David?
No, I think my last comment was really my last comment. So,
So did you have last comment for us?
So, yeah.
You know,
No, I think that
and I
you
think
said a lot.
Senator will
You
still
said
do
a
well
lot.
because you can do both. You can do both senator and community as well. Because, we need sane, I don't want to say for crazy, but focus, critical analysis within the corridors of decision making. We've seen the quality of what we have. We all could identify, because very well people are elected based on popularity and not based on their capacity to perform. And therefore, I understand why we need senators. So please reconsider, because the decisions that are being made by persons are affecting all of us, and they can only give us what they have.
I prefer to invest in people. I think people can speak with their own voice. It's so much more powerful if more people speak rather than speak for people.
A few people,
But
yes.
sometimes people don't know what to say.
Well, this is the work.
According to my old
That's the
lecturer,
work.
sometimes people don't know what they don't know. Right, Mr. Daniel? Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And until you start to talk to us, as he would say, the light bulb comes on and say, that's what that is about. And that's why we're hoping that the movement will keep these type of discussions open. We plan to have another session leading up to Labor Day, and we're trusting that you all will come back and participate, both in terms of panelists as well as participants.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Thank you.
So we want to say thank you so much for taking time off from your busy schedule to come and talk to us here at Cipriani, and we look forward to talking to you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.